So I want to get us thinking in the right direction tonight. So we're going to see a couple different levels, and we're going to start here, and that's with you. So when you want to please yourself, when you want to make yourself happy, not sinfully, this is not a guilt thing, right? But when you want to feel happiness, when you want to feel pleased or you treat yourself, what kind of things do you do to please yourself? Yep, Ben. A steak, a massage, and a latte. All right. Very specific, but I love it. A steak, massage, and a latte. All right. That's fantastic. So, our favorite food? A good drink? Something relaxing? Something relaxing? Do what? All at once. But the latte and the massage are kind of counterintuitive, aren't they? Yeah. Tony's just picturing a really long straw. Oh, so you're getting a massage while someone's feeding you the steak, and you have okay, all right, great. Now we've all got too much going on. All right, what else? You want to make yourself happy, or you need to feel some joy. You need to feel something pleasant, something good. What do you do for you? Okay, all right. So thumb scrolling, your favorite thing, right? Oh, buying something. Okay, all right. So literally meeting your needs, meeting your physical needs by doing some online shopping. I love it. What else? Date night. Okay, getting away from the boys. Yes, with you, Aaron. She's got to practice her massage or steak cooking. Get a cappuccino machine. All right, what else? What else? When you want to be pleased, you want to feel joy. What kind of things do you do? Okay. All right. Is it
Put things together and see the beauty of it.
and create? Okay. Let me ask you a question with your quilting, because you've done that for a long time. Is that something that allows your mind, like your hands know what they're doing, so your mind doesn't have to be there, or is it something that takes concentration the whole time? Okay. All right. You look at him like he's tried it without concentrating. Okay, all right. So it's like a big giant puzzle, and he knows to get away from you? Yes. Yeah. All right. I like that. So, okay. All right.
Getting out in the way, and it's opposite of that. It's not concentration. It's not having. It's just a complete mental relaxation. Just get out.
Doing something that allows your mind to just
Just relax.
yeah. Okay. All right. Now let's take that to the next step. When you want to please someone other than yourself, what kind of process do you go through? You want to make someone else happy. You want to do something good or something nice or something thoughtful for someone else. What does that process look like?
First thing you have to do is listen,
Okay.
because you have to know what pleases them or what makes them happy.
Okay. All right. Sometimes we fall into the trap of wanting to do something good for someone.
Something that we would like, they may not like it.
Yeah, it kind of falls flat sometimes, doesn't it? Because we had a good intention, but it was sometimes that can be self-serving, right? I want to feel good about me, so I'm going to direct something at you. All right. So she said the process is you need to listen, discovering what someone else actually wants, actually cares about. Okay? So then what? You want to please someone else. What are some specific ways that, or some specific things that you do? And they can be something that you do for your spouse. They can be something that you do for your kids, or what do you do when you want to make somebody else happy?
Sometimes I'll see that she's having a bad day and I'll just take the boys away. We'll just go do whatever and just let her have some time.
Give her that time and space? Okay, all right. And so sometimes, so you're listening and you're hearing and you're going, okay, frustration's getting a little high, or we're getting a little squirrely over here, so let's remove all that.
Along the lines that I know the boys and they're gonna make it worse. So I'm gonna get them out of the equation.
Right.
Just let this go away.
And so, and that requires listening. It requires paying attention, right? Yeah. You ever blown up at your spouse for being inconsiderate to your needs and they had no idea what you were talking about? Or maybe you've gotten blown up on. Yeah, no, this week. Yeah. Yeah, but not this year? Oh, you guys are on a roll.
We took that once, and Ben was like equal day across the board all at once. Oh, you just need everything. Okay. Really narrows it down.
No. See, you should have seen that as an opportunity that I can do anything super shallow and you'll be happy. I can do anything at all and you will be pleased. I think that'd be easier to please. You could, yeah. Just a pat on the arm or a small gift of a piece of gum. You're killing it. Anybody else?
Things though that please someone, and may set their day on the right course. I mean, see, empty the dishwasher without me even saying or telling them it needed to be empty. I mean, just little things.
Mm-hmm.
And help make the day better.
Yeah, and we sometimes we don't understand how powerful that is, or we don't remember. We know how powerful it is, but we don't remember how powerful it is when someone does something just for us without having to be asked or without any ulterior motives. They just want to show us a kindness, and they want to please us. All right, well, we think about pleasing ourselves, we think about pleasing others, and we're going to bring this to Matthew chapter 3, and we're going to think tonight about what it looks like to please God. Because our greatest desire, more than pleasing our spouse, more than pleasing our kids, more than pleasing ourselves, our greatest desire is to please God. And so in the Gospel of Matthew, 2 times God breaks through. This first one in Matthew chapter 3 at the baptism of Jesus, and then in Matthew 17 at the Mount of Transfiguration. 2 times God takes the effort and does this amazing, miraculous thing of allowing his voice to be directly heard, and he says about his son, I am well pleased. I am well pleased. At this moment, what is going on, what is happening here, what he is doing, what he is involved in, I am well pleased. He makes me happy. Matthew chapter 3, let's take a look at the first one. Somebody will read for me 13 to the end of the chapter, that last paragraph in Matthew chapter 3.
Then Jesus came from Galilee to the Jordan to be baptized of John. But John tried to deter him, saying, I need to be baptized by you, and will you come to me? And Jesus replied, let it be so now. It is proper for us to do this to fulfill all righteousness. Then John consented. As soon as Jesus was baptized, he went up out of the water, and at that moment heaven was opened, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and alighting on him. And a voice from heaven said, this is my Son, whom I love, with him I am well pleased.
Okay, turn over to chapter 17. Matthew chapter 17. And if somebody will read 1 through 8, that first long paragraph. Matthew 17, 1 through 8.
Now, 6 days Jesus took with him Peter and James and John his brother, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. He was
Okay. All right. So I want us to take a look at these two instances, these two times where we get to hear the Father look down at the Son and just let everybody know He has pleased me. He has made me happy. He has done something or shown something or been something that fills my heart. And so in chapter 3, where are we at in the grand scheme of things of the gospel story? What would you consider Matthew chapter 3? Or what has just happened when God comes through and says this? Jesus is baptized. It's at the beginning of his ministry, right? Yeah. So God has promised to send his Messiah. He has promised to send his Son into the world. And Jesus gets everything started. He goes to John and he says, well, we're fulfilling righteousness here. We are bringing this to a fulfillment, which is interesting because it is at the beginning of his ministry. And then he comes out of the water, the Spirit descends upon him and rests upon him, and God puts that seal of approval, that praise, and says, this makes me happy. Now at this point in what Jesus has done, what is God happy with? Why is he pleased here?
It's the beginning of a downhill slide. You work for something for so long, you keep working at it, and eventually you hit that crest, and you know that you've hit that point where I'm headed towards the goal, and I'm on my way there. This is the beginning of Jesus' ministry, which is the beginning of everything that he started from the beginning. He wanted us to all be saved, and this was the beginning of his ministry, and he was fixing to fulfill everything that had been talked about through all the chapters of the Old Testament throughout eternity, or throughout the existence of the earth. This was the beginning of the plan. We're kicking it off. I'm ready to roll, and it's happening. There's something about that when you crest in a big effort and you know you're there. There's something about that beginning of the downhill slide that just makes you happy. You know you're headed that way. You're on that path.
Okay, so you see in this first story that God is speaking more towards the cosmic story rather than speaking.
Not necessarily that moment, but the whole picture.
Okay.
I'll make it well.
Even Jesus hasn't let the human side take over. He's been human since a baby, and here he is being baptized, and he knows God's plan. He's part of God's plan, but there's also that human humanity about him that he could have split at some point in time, and God knows he is going to do what he wants him to do.
Okay, all right.
Big part of this, it's, well, in John chapter 5, Jesus said that the Father is, that God is a witness of him. And this is God witnessing, this is my beloved Son, whom I love you. So when he tells people, all of John is about Jesus affirming that he is God, and they say he equates himself with the Father, he calls himself the Son, and they hate him for it. This is God saying, this is my Son, I am well pleased with him. He's pointing, this is, God's the witness, God's witnessing about him, God's affirming him, God's anointing him to start the ministry. That's just, people want to argue, well, God never, said anything about Jesus being, yeah, God witnessed, this is my Son. He gave his testimony, he said, this is my Son. I'm well pleased, he's doing my will.
Yeah. And I think it's important that we see, because here in Matthew chapter 3, we hear God speaking to this, and it is coming. It's the beginning of Jesus' ministry. At the same time, it's a culmination of thousands of years of God enduring everything from his children for that right time, where it was the time for him to say, okay, now everything is perfect and put in place. It's time for you to go and do what we were always going to do. Now is the time. Now is the time. And then we get over to Matthew chapter 17, and the transfiguration in Matthew's gospel. At what point of the story are we talking about here? Closer to the end, right? And pretty soon, Jesus is going to go to Calvary. He's going to die on the cross. He's going to be the ultimate fulfillment of this last plan that everything has been building up to. And God gives him the same thing that he gave him at the beginning of his ministry, because Jesus does act in obedience. He is fulfilling all righteousness. He is being baptized not for his sins. He is being baptized to fulfill righteousness. And his baptism showed John, and it showed the world that he was God's son. So it was an identity marker. And at the same time, he is saying, when righteousness of God saying, this is what needs to happen, Jesus saying, I'm not immune to that. I'm a part of that. I'm a part of that. So we get it at the beginning of his ministry. Here we get it at the end of his ministry. He is about to go to the cross, and we know the suffering and the struggle and the faith and the strength necessary for Jesus to endure all of the horrible things that he endures at the hands of people that are not worthy to even touch him. And yet he willingly endures all of that. And the Father again comes back on that mountain and says, this is my son. He pleases me. He pleases me. He does the things that please me. Now, I wanted us to look at the example of Jesus before we got to our own lives, because what do you think was, or do you think that this was powerful in the life of Jesus, to hear the Father break through and say, you have pleased me today? What do you think that was like for Jesus?
For Jews, it was a big deal, especially on the Mount of Transfiguration, because they should have caught the symbolism. Exodus 33 and also in 40, every time Moses would meet with God in the tabernacle, a cloud would come down, and people will know that the presence of God is there. And in 19, verse 9, it said, in Exodus 19:9, it says, behold, I am coming to you in a thick cloud, that the people may hear when I speak with you, and may also believe you forever. So all that was pointing to Jesus. And so God is saying, this is my son, because this cloud is like, why would a cloud come over him? This is why, because God was showing, this is my beloved son, and will please listen to him. It helps when you have, and I think Jesus was pleased with it, it helps when you have this, Jesus knew what he was supposed to do, Jesus knew why he was there, he was to speak for God, but it really helps, it helped him, like, if we're representing somebody and we're going and okay, I've got to find a job in a few months, and I have references. And I said, this is what I can do, turn my resume, this is what I can do, this is what I am. But these people, my references, they call them, they kind of affirm that they say yes. And it feels good to have someone, probably with Jesus being on earth, I would say at that time the Father was in a higher position to affirm. You have someone you look up to, someone who teaches you, someone who, they affirm that yes, you can do this. Yes, this is what you can do. They tell someone, yes, this person is who they say they are. And I think that's what this does for Jesus. Yeah, God says, yes, this is my son, I will please listen to him. He is who he says. He's saying he is who he says he is. I guess a shorter way to say it, God has his back.
Mhm.
And that it's just support. I don't know how many times, I think we fall back on the verse of, God is for us, who can be against us? And that emboldens us and that strengthens us.
Yeah.
And that had to do that with Christ.
Yeah, and one of the things that it needs to do for us, because God is affirming his son at the beginning of his ministry, he's affirming his son again before he goes to the cross. But remember the witnesses. How many did he take on the mountain with him? 3. He didn't even take the 12. I mean, something big is happening here. God is coming through to speak to Jesus, to affirm him, to set his seal on him, to strengthen and encourage him. And this was not a thing for the masses. I mean, even with Exodus and Israel's history and the presence of God in the cloud, which if he just let everybody see this, whoa! God is doing something here, and Jesus makes it more of a private thing. So I think you and I need to be encouraged when affirmed by the Father that you don't need hundreds of people to receive the same affirmation that you receive. It's not necessary. It is not necessary. And God has given us affirmation in our lives that needs to encourage and strengthen us to continue on the path of faithfulness. He's given us enough. He has shown us enough. He has said, I am pleased with you. I am pleased with you. And I don't know. Maybe, I don't know your heart, but maybe your heart is one that you have a hard time grasping that you have a hard time holding on to the Father being pleased with you. Maybe you're stuck in a game of, well, I had a good day, so I must be close to God, or I slipped today, so God's not very happy with me today. I can't even imagine him saying, good job. I'm pleased with you today, right? And I hope for you that you know, as God's faithful child, you and I don't have the perfection that Jesus has, but that's the wonderful thing. We received the righteousness of Christ. We receive the credit for Jesus living the perfect life. When you see it that way, when you understand it that way, that's not just mere talk. Oh yeah, I know, I have sin and my sins need to be forgiven and my sins are washed away in the blood of Christ, and he did that for me. At the same time, when he gives me credit, when God gives me credit only due to Jesus in my soul, then God can still look at me, not with the same measure as Christ, right? And it had nothing to do with sin. It had nothing to do with perfection. It had everything to do with obedience, is it not? Yeah, it's obedience. That's what God is looking at and saying, that makes me happy. Your obedience makes me happy. Now, of course, does our disobedience disappoint? Sure. But we're faithful Christians. We're faithful Christians. And I would hope you're having more days of obedience and pleasing the Father than you are of, oh boy, I'm really just tearing it up right now. All right, let's turn over to 2 Corinthians chapter 5. Because this has got to come to us. This has got to come to us. So I want to...
Real quick, kind of a really cool caveat that I think about this, the more I think about it. Throughout the Old Testament and everything, when you hear the voice of God speaking, it's always masked. There's a cloud, there's a burning bush, there's a fire, there's smoke, there's wind, there's whatever, there's visions, all this stuff. In these two instances, it's the voice of God. No mask. It's God. He's just speaking. And that's huge because there's no need for a mask or anything. I'm the Father. This is my Son. I'm going to voice it and say, this is my Son, and I'm well pleased with him. And you look at all the different translations and all that, throughout time, all the different translations, there's no different translation. This is my Son. With him I'm well pleased. It's always that. And there's something powerful
Authenticating?
Yeah, he was saying, okay, because everybody was looking at John the Baptist as being the one that, they were looking toward him. But now, after Christ baptism, he's now saying, and John was kind of preaching, I'm talking about repentance, I'm baptizing for repentance, but the one who comes to baptize you with fire and the Holy Spirit. So God is putting that impact at that point with John the Baptist, but also in Christ, by the stamp of approval. And then we can see the same thing happening on Transfiguration, that throughout Jewish history, Father Abraham, Moses, Elijah, that was the one that put it on the pedestal. But not anymore. God put Christ on the pedestal. He said, this is my stamp of approval.
This brings us to 2 Corinthians 5. Because in 2 Corinthians 5, the Apostle Paul is going to bring us into this because it's as much as, as close of a connection that the Father and the Son Jesus have. I mean, Jesus went to great pains throughout the Gospels, and especially in John's Gospel, of saying, I want you to have that same connection. I mean, this is why I'm dying on the cross, so your sins can be forgiven, so you can come back and be restored, be reconciled to your Father. I want you to enjoy that same thing. So I know that for us, we are all looking forward to that day where he comes back and he looks at us and he looks at our lives and he speaks right to our hearts and says, well done, good and faithful servant. You did what I asked you to do. You did. You ran your race. You finished the course. You held on to your faith all the way to the end. And as we look towards that in the future, Apostle Paul here in 2 Corinthians 5 is going to help us out with this, with being able to please God. Starting in verse 1. 2 Corinthians 5:1. For we know that if the tent that is our earthly home is destroyed, we have a building from God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. For in this tent we groan, longing to put on our heavenly dwelling, if indeed by putting it on we may not be found naked. For while we are still in this tent, we groan, being burdened, not that we would be unclothed, but that we would be further clothed, so that what is mortal may be swallowed up by life. He who has prepared us for this very thing is God, who has given us the Spirit as a guarantee. So we are always of good courage. We know that while we are at home in the body, we are away from the Lord. For we walk by faith and not by sight. Yes, we are of good courage, and we would rather be away from the body and at home with the Lord. So whether we are at home or away, we make it our aim to please him. For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, so that each one may receive what is due for what he has done in the body, whether good or evil. All right. So, we're past 8, so we're not going to dive into this. I just wanted you to hear this before we get out. We'll pick this back up. Here's what I want you to think about. Here's what I want you to think about this week. 2 things is number one, I want you to think about all the groaning that is done in this tent of a body. All the unsatisfactory yearning and longing and struggling that is done in this tent. And the second thing I want you to consider, think about, study, is how do you please him when you're away? Don't answer tonight. That's what we'll come back next week and we'll jump in on. How do you please God in the there? So, thank you for sharing tonight.